well. My colleague, Monica Reyes. The two of us will be providing you an introduction to Step 4, financial preparation activities. Before we go ahead, we do have a quick review of where we were from last week. We are now on Step 4 of the 10 steps that we're moving forward through. Today's focus, again, will be the preparation phase for finance.
Did you just hang up? They put it on hold.
We're getting serenaded here. Okay. And we'll be looking at finance preparation, consistency check, reconciliation processes, period end closing activities, and document posting of all data. So we're scheduled for approximately 1.5 hours. We may not use all that time. I'm open to all questions. Please put questions verbally or in the chat. As I provide the presentation, Monica will attempt to deal with the questions in the chat in real time, and we'll move forward from there. So just a quick review where we are from a project perspective. We're moving from ERP 6.0 to S/4HANA 1909 system. We are where the red arrow is at the bottom, Step 4. Step 4, where you are going to focus on the financial preparation phase. This is before any conversion of the system itself occurs. The agenda for today will be a review of the previous work package, a very, very top-level review, one slide, I believe. And we'll go into then directly into the finance preparation activities. There'll be an intro, a quick intro, an approach on how the finance preparation activities will be orchestrated. And then we'll go into some of the preparation activities themselves. And then, of course, at the very end, a closure and a call to action. So let's take a quick review, very, very quick review of the last step, Step 3, that was provided by my colleague, Sounda, logistics preparation activities. So 3 main areas we're focused on, the business partner with customer vendor integration. The main thought there was that business partner is now the leading object for S/4HANA. There was also discussion along those lines about the various capabilities of performing number assignment scenarios for business partner, customer, and vendors. And there was an extensive discussion on CVI lessons learned. Secondly, there was the discussion on storage location, MRP. Key area there is that the MRP area is now key for MRP activity in S/4HANA moving forward. And then lastly, there was the material number field length extension, where the field length is now up to 40 characters. And there was a discussion ongoing on the impact to coding and interfaces. So that's where we were with Step 3. Now we're on the finance preparation activities, and we'll focus on the intro. So with the intro, there are 2, just to set the stage, there were 3 paths previously discussed for S/4HANA. There was a new implementation path, or the greenfield path. There was the system conversion path. And then there was the landscape transformation path, also rebranded or renamed to selective data transition, or SDT. We are going to focus on this step specifically on the system conversion approach. However, many of the concepts are applicable throughout all the approaches that are there. So first off, there are 2 main activities when preparing for the finance migration. There's configuration changes, and then there's the actual conversion process itself. The conversion guide, 233-2030, listed in the first line of the slide, refers to the methodology and the restrictions for moving to a finance conversion for S/4HANA 1909. The conversion guide itself has a very detailed PDF embedded within that SAP note, and that PDF provides information central to the entire conversion process. The conversion time itself is dependent on the volume of transactions. Conversion programs read data from the old table and transfer them to the new S/4HANA structures that are created as you move your system into the S/4HANA data model. At that point, during the conversion process, during the SUM, or Software Update Manager process, compatibility views are created to allow protection for old reports and old transaction codes in certain situations. These compatibility views allow you to simulate some of the old functionality from the ERP data model in your S/4HANA converted system. In many cases, finance configuration and customizing has to be adapted in some areas. These are very conveniently listed in the simplification list that is generated during the course of the product. You will note that as you go through your simplification list, there'll be line items specific to what's changing, functionality that may no longer exist and may need to be replaced within the simplification list. And there'll be a very detailed SAP note associated with each of those line items within the simplification list. And we'll go through that as well. For financing, there is some customizing that has to be done prior to the conversion. And then also within your step 6, occurring in a few days, will occur during the step 6 or when you move into an S/4HANA data model scenario. So we'll go into, within step 4, some of the customizing to prepare you to start converting your system. Within a system conversion, it's not always possible to activate new functionality. Or it's not that it's not possible, but it's also not advisable. It's not a best practice. There are certain features in finance, such as document splitting, parallel ledgers, which may be performed before you move into a conversion scenario, or you may execute the implement, that is, these new functionality after the conversion. But it is definitely a best practice not to try to implement new functionality during the conversion process itself. Additionally, the classic general ledger, if you're using that on your ERP side, is actually technically transferred to the new GL in S/4HANA during the conversion process. Although, and we'll talk about that in a few moments, there's no specific requirement to move to the new GL before you initiate a conversion process for accounting. So this is also a good time to recognize that during the conversion process, there's limited selection
Su
criteria.
mensaje ha alcanzado la duración máxima. Para escuchar el mensaje, marque 1. Para continuar grabando, marque 2.
The 29th person to join the meeting. This meeting is now being recorded.
Si usted tiene problemas con su buzón de voz, por favor, contacte al centro de atención al cliente.
Sounds like you might have gotten it there.
I'm going to try to mute everybody. Hold on.
Okay.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Okay. I think that's cut out the background noise. Thank you very much, Dan. Apologies to everyone on the line for that short interruption. So let's get back into it. So we were talking about Classic GL. If you're using Classic General Ledger, or even if you're using Classic General Ledger, you can move from your ERP Classic General Ledger into S/4HANA. During the conversion process, your Classic General Ledger is automatically mapped into a new GL format. And so we'll talk about that in a little more detail in the next few slides as well. So moving forward, actually, we'll talk about that now. So the next slide itself is talking just about what we're talking about. So we're talking Classic GL on the ERP side. To the left of the dotted line going down the center of the slide is your ERP system, and on the right, the S/4HANA converted system is represented. So you have two different scenarios. You can have Classic GL that migrates to the new GL before you do a conversion into S/4HANA, or you can perform a conversion directly from the Classic GL and move that into the new GL Universal Journal concept within S/4HANA. This has been available for a number of releases since 1503 and 1709 for certain functionality. This is different from what you may have understood if you had worked with an earlier version of 1503. At that point in time, you needed to move first on your ERP side to a new GL before migration. But since the subsequent versions of S/4HANA, that is no longer necessary. So especially if you're looking at 1809 or the current version, newly released version of 1909, the need to move to a new GL on your ERP side before going to S/4HANA is definitely not required itself. You can also note here, as I mentioned earlier in summary before, parallel ledgers and document splits, two very common features that you may want to implement during your conversion process. You really have two scenarios, as I had mentioned. You can, while you're still on the ERP side, you can migrate to the new GL and implement parallel ledgers and document splits before you start your conversion process to S/4HANA. Once you're converted into S/4HANA in that scenario, that's the top line, you will continue to have parallel ledgers and document splits moved over into S/4HANA automatically. Alternatively, on the second line, if you are in a Classic GL configuration on your ERP side, you can move directly from Classic into your new GL and Universal Journal paradigm in S/4HANA. However, the recommendation, as mentioned earlier, is that there would be a subsequent introduction of a mini project to implement parallel ledgers and document split at that point after the conversion process has been completed, is the best practice and the recommendation. So technically, you can activate document split and parallel ledgers after a period close. That's really a minor limitation, but practically it may make more sense to activate this functionality at a year-end close, especially for document splitting, so that a full set of financials can be more easily analyzed. And that's just from a practical perspective. But technically, there really isn't any limitations other than the recommendations of performing a period close before implementing these features. So in terms of the approach, there are, of course, many projects live for S/4HANA Finance and S/4HANA in general, and they've successfully performed the conversion from ERP systems with the tools provided within this training program. So these are all delivered tools that are available for you to perform your conversion. In terms of the lessons learned, some finance customization needs to be adapted depending on new functionalities available with the release, such as additional currencies, parallel ledgers, parallel valuation. There's a series of check reports and programs that can be run on the ECC source system, and that's being executed on the old data structure. But you should be aware that running these check reports and programs do not necessarily show every error that can come up during the conversion process to S/4HANA. It's a limitation of the ECC system, the data model, and potentially even the database if it's non-HANA. When you do convert to S/4HANA, you rerun many of these check reports and programs or variations of them, and you'll note that errors then will be discovered. Inconsistencies in your data may be discovered at the conversion. That is normal. The reason being is that the interrogation of the data is at a much finer level of detail because of the enhancements of the abilities of the HANA database itself and the new data model within S/4HANA in particular that allows a deeper evaluation of the data and look for consistencies where at the record level, whereas in your ERP check program, you may be looking at inconsistencies more at a total level, as one example. Thirdly, transaction data in the source system may lead to errors during the conversion. Known errors need to be identified and corrected before productive conversion. The whole concept of performing an iterative sandbox approach, which we'll discuss in a moment, on how to perform your conversion is very crucial for the finance conversion piece. Data needs to be consistent and there needs to be corrections in order to make fiscal sense out of what is going to be converted in your system. And so that means that during these cycles, as you go through a number of cycles, you're going to discover what the corrections are. Some of the corrections may be as simple as archiving problematic data out of the ERP system before conversion. It may have very low value in the new system, new targeted S/4HANA system. That might be an easy approach. Some of the other data requires maybe some table modifications, maybe some modifications to customizing and so forth that will be described in detail in the error messages as you go through the process. So this is the conversion overview as shown in the conversion guide itself. This is just a screen capture of the overall process that's there. You'll note that in two main divisions, there's a preparation phase and a realization phase. We're over at the bottom left where it says step 4, preparation of financial data. As you move forward, you'll move into under where it says C5, the software update manager. At that point, when that process is executed from a financial perspective, you'll be creating a universal journal structure, AC.X, but it will be primarily empty. So there won't be any data in that system. It won't be until you move into step 6, the following step after you run the software update manager, where you're actually converting the finance data and filling those new tables in S/4HANA for finance. So the software update manager is step 5 of this training program, and we're at step 4 all the way on the left at this point. So the conversion approach is really 2 steps. You have a series of sandbox conversions where you're making a full copy of your productive system, and then you're running through the process to determine what needs to be corrected in your source system in order to have a error-free conversion process. The reason for that ultimately is to minimize downtime of your system, and also from a finance perspective to get the best quality data converted into S/4HANA that you can. There's also the productive environment conversion. So once you have the sandbox conversion process detailed in what's called a runbook, you're able to replicate that runbook on your productive environment and convert that to S/4HANA. And that includes your development, test, and productive environments as well. Here's a nice schematic of what the process looks like. So you have your 3 box typical landscape, dev, QA, and prod. You have a system copy that is created of your productive environment. You run through a conversion process, and then you're going to provide feedback, corrections back into your main system. There is a note. So this is you have 2 main methods of bringing corrections back into your productive systems. You have you of course can perform transport going from dev, QA, and production, and that's the primary corrective mechanism that you would use. However, there is also an RFC connection that can be established between your converted system and your productive environment. And Note 2525322 provides information. These corrections that are facilitated through this RFC connection are more technical in nature, more table changes, type corrections that need to be communicated back into your productive ERP system. So just be aware that these 2 approaches are used during the conversion process. Of course, as you run through the first iteration, it'll take a bit longer. You'll identify a number of corrections, but not all of them, possibly. And you'll run through a series of corrections eventually where you're going to build up a complete runbook that's going to minimize overall downtime in your system when you actually convert your productive environment itself. You don't want to underestimate this time. It takes for the sandbox iterations. During this process, there's a lot of data cleansing that has to occur. There's customizing, adaptation that has to occur. It's an iterative process. An average rule of thumb is 2 to 5 conversion attempts are used typically by our customers in order to fine-tune the runbook into a relatively lean process. So looking at the preparation phase itself, you're going to run various consistency checks. There's a main program there, RFC Start Check, that is going to detail where many of your problems are going to rise if you were to just run the sum. If you don't fix these problems, the sum will stop working. The software update manager will not proceed. It'll error out as well. If you bypass the error and you try to continue on to complete the conversion, your data in S/4HANA will be erroneous and will not make a lot of sense. So you need to fix these problems. You need to really focus on this RC Start Check program and identify what needs to be fixed in your ERP system for an efficient S/4HANA conversion. You also have a series of consistency checks and reports shown on the lower right-hand side, where you are performing consistency checks that, at least on the ERP side, primarily on total values, and you're going to be executing those reports in step 4 today as well. Some of the common failures that we've seen is that a developer may make a table modification that leads to an inconsistency. Maybe there was a modification to a total table that didn't get perpetuated through all the other interactive tables in the ERP data model. And so there may be some inconsistencies on some of the total values in these reports. That's one common failure that comes to mind. But the overall goal here is to provide consistency of data, is to perform various system checks whilst users are still in the system. That's uptime. We're talking about uptime definition here. And then you also have the concept of downtime. When users are locked out, you'll run your final check reports. There's a series of reports that you'll run to document your financial position, so that after you convert the data in S/4HANA, you'll rerun these 14 or so reports in S/4HANA, and you'll do a comparison to have confidence that the financial position was correctly converted into S/4HANA.
Hey, Sheldon, can we pause there and maybe see if there's any questions online? And maybe if somebody wants to ask a question, they could unmute their phone, *6.
Yeah, let me give just the final word before we do that, if I may. And yeah, please unmute the lines. It's like to be more interactive, if we could. I'd like to give you an example while you're thinking of a question or typing a question in. An example of, we talked about the sandbox iterations a moment ago. A real customer from a few months ago with 100+ company codes, 10 years of data, 7.4 billion rows in AC.A. You might ask, how long could you expect those sandbox iterations to occur? So those sandbox, for this particular customer, a real customer, the first sandbox iteration took 29.7 days. The second iteration took only 7.2. That run book is being built up after the first iteration. They know what to do, becomes a lot more efficient. And then the third iteration drops down to about 5 days. So just to give you an idea of how much time it takes to go through those sandbox iterations. Any questions?
Hi, this is Carl Dunstan from Comscope. A lot of this looked like you were adjusting the fixing stuff on the ECC side, but be able to handle these conversions. But is there ever stuff that has to be adjusted to, like, your final? Is there something that has to be adjusted on the HANA side or that for HANA side, or I guess it's the same box. What are these? Your arrows are pointing back to the ECC, like, you made a copy of it and you're making changes and you notice you can adjust things, and you have the arrow going back to the production ECC to show that these changes are reflected there. Are these changes all before conversion and that has to be fixed on ECC? Like those right arrows.
So we're talking about step. Excellent question. And just for clarification, the sandbox iteration is for you to figure out what needs to be done on the ECC side, the ERP side, prior to moving over to S/4HANA. There are inconsistencies in your source system that are discovered going through this process. Those inconsistencies need to be fixed in the ERP system, in the ECC system. And this process of sandbox iteration allows you to discover what those are and feed back into your productive environment, where then you make those corrections, either through this RFC connection or through transport, You make another copy, and then you run through the process again until you get a clean run, right? Once that occurs,
what are they?
you're going to then move.
What would
Some of the inconsistencies. So as I mentioned before, one example would be that a developer may have made a fundamental change on a table that was inconsistent to some other tables. Another good example is that there may be configuration that has been changed, but transaction data to that configuration may still exist. So the system during the conversion process will need to have more information on how to process that data because the configuration to support it is no longer in the system. Things along those lines. There's a whole, the entire RC check report that I had mentioned, which we'll go into, the consistency check for customizing. We'll go through a lot of that information, not just for finance, but through the entire system. It checks that, but we're going to focus on finance today. So we'll go into that on the next slide. Does that make sense?
Some of it, like CO tables versus FI tables, or like profit center accounting versus FI and all that. It's certainly going to go into like one ledger. Is that some of the areas that we're talking about?
Oh, these consistency checks are there'll be data consistency checks where totals don't match where they need to match. To just put it at a high level, there may be a mismatch between the underlying technical table structures themselves. There may be, as I said before, customizing that needs to be adapted for the data, or to be adapted due to changes in functionality in S/4HANA as you move to S/4HANA, things of that sort. So it's quite a large bag of potential changes. When we get into the RC check report itself, it'll give you line by line what each of those inconsistencies are. It'll give you a note, an SAP note that explains the inconsistency and what to do about it. In fact, during the step 4 process, as you go through the activity, there's a really a good error correction process that you'll be going and executing during your activity exercise. In this case, it's an assignment of the depreciation area. And it's an assignment of a depreciation area that no longer exists in the system, but it's assigned in a table that during the consistency check, it realizes, well, this particular depreciation area is at one point existed, but it doesn't exist now. You got to take it out of the system. And you'll go through that process in the beginning parts of your step 4 activities. This is one example.
Hi, Sheldon.
Is that okay? Yep, go ahead.
Hi. Regarding the example you gave where the conversion time went from 29 days to 5 days, I am assuming that is just the conversion time for the uptime and downtime inclusive, but not the analysis to run the reports? Or was it everything?
Oh, this was the complete cycle of the sandbox, right? So it was the time it took them to make a copy of the productive environment and perform the total conversion to S/4HANA and to move those corrections back into their source system. It's that cycle.
Oh, okay. That's
It's
the
not,
cycle.
not
Okay.
specific to uptime and downtime. It's just from a project management perspective, it's what that sandbox cycle, the time it took. Yeah. Yeah. The point there,
I know
question. The point there is that it gets a lot more efficient, a lot easier. That's why we recommend iteration. And as I said before, most customers will do 2 to 5 iterations in the sandbox before they attempt a conversion on the productive environment.
Yeah, there has been true for all migrations of this nature. Now, there was a presentation in the last year, TechEd 2018, by a customer, and they were talking about similar experiences, how it was brought down to fit. I think they were also talking about fitting the downtime part of it in a weekend. I think.
Was that for solar, Satish? Hello? Yeah. Hey, Satish, was that first solar presentation that you're referring to?
I think so. Yeah, that was at the beginning of the decade last year.
So what we do with that one, we actually basically looked at the log of like for example, when you do your first cycle, it's typically a production copy, right? And then what we do from on the technical side, we look at the logs, the XML file from the upgrade or the conversion, and then we look at areas to improve in terms of the current hardware, and then make adjustments in various processes to try to reduce that outage window, right? On the finance side, we also look at it. So when we talk about finance, we really just concentrate on the finance migration piece because that's considered business downtime portion of it. So when the system is converted to S/4HANA, which we will do in step 5, and in step 6, you would basically move all the finance data from the old tables into the AC.A table using the migrations cockpit. That during that move is also considered business downtime too. So we look at it from the software update managers tuning, and we also look at it from a finance migration tuning opportunity as well. So with that, I think First Solar made it fit over a weekend with the Friday 5 p.m. outage and brought it back online on Sunday afternoon.
If I remember right, they were not done with the production yet. That presentation was based on their early on experiences, how they refined the process, but they were not done with the production that time.
No, they were done. They actually went live in July. And then TechEd was in September, right?
You're talking about 2018?
Yeah, 2018.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
There was a question.
I could share the deck with you if you want to.
Sure, yeah.
There was a question in the chat. It says moving from Jaideep, moving from classic GL to Universal Ledger S4, is splitting an option? Is it optional? Can this be activated later once needed? Jaideep, yeah, it can be optional. Let me go back to that slide, if I may. One more here. There we go. So if you can see the slide again, you either can implement document split before you move to S/4HANA. Of course, at that point, that's the top line. You have to also migrate to new GL on your ERP side in order to allow that to occur. Or you can take path number 2, the second path, where you move from classic GL into the Universal Journal. You convert your system to S/4HANA. That's the second line there. And then have a subsequent introduction of document split for your system at that point. That's the mini project, follow-on project that we would suggest that best practice would be to have that as a follow-on project to the conversion project, not to combine them. So, yeah, to answer your question, it can be a subsequent activity after the conversion process is complete.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Alan.
Okay. So let me go into the consistency check. There's a lot of questions on that before. Get back to that slide. Oh, here we go. One too many. Okay, so this is a screen capture of the consistency check where I know instead of an eye chart, you'll be actually viewing those directly and running this process, this RC Start Check program in your Work Package 04 and Work Package 06, Step 4 and Step 6 on this course. You'll note that there are lights, red, green, yellow. There's no red on this one at the moment. When you first go into the system to do Step 4, you'll see some red lights that are there. One of them is a finance-specific item that has to do with the depreciation area I mentioned before, and it'll give you instruction on, it'll tell you what caused the error, how to fix the error, and you'll follow the instructions in Step 4 activity documents to actually fix the error in your ECC system prior to conversion. You'll then rerun this consistency check, and then you'll see that the light, the traffic light will turn green after you make a successful correction. Key point here, however, is that this is a list of all the inconsistencies of the customizing that's within the system prior to conversion. This is focusing on your ECC system. And as you go through and analyze this report, you'll note that there is a column here, hard to read, but it says note. There's an SAP note for every one of them. This SAP note is going to give you the specific details on how to make the necessary corrections in your system. Okay. The other thing here is that from a project management perspective, you also have the ability to look at the components, namely the area of specialty for these particular errors. So you may have a logistics error, you may have a finance error, you may have a production planning error, things of that sort. You can, from a project perspective, more easily control some of the tasks that are necessary to develop this run book of corrections that you need by using this as at least as this report as an initial guide to identify some of the tasks that need to be dealt with. Again, at the end of the day, before you can efficiently move to S/4HANA, your productive environment moves to S/4HANA, these traffic lights need to be green or at the very least yellow, indicating no harm will be done to these converted data and systems. Yeah. Any red lights on this report will become red lights in your next Step 5, where you run the software update management process. So correction is necessary for you to get consistency of data. So there's the concept of consistency checks we talked about. Step 4 is focused on the prep phase. There's another round of consistency checks that occur after the sum phase, the software update manager runs, and you get into your Step 6. This is now in S/4HANA. These consistency checks may look similar, but they're different. As I mentioned before, the level of interrogation of the data is a lot more detailed oriented after you get into S/4HANA because of the HANA database, because of the new HANA data model, things of that sort. So it's very important to recognize that if your consistency checks all pass in the Step 4 in the pre-converted ECC system, you cannot assume that the consistency checks are also going to pass after conversion. It's a different level of interrogation of the data. There's another view of it. So the reports in step 4 are different from step 6. The step 6, S4HANA take advantage of other technologies that S4HANA and HANA provide, essentially. And so it's much deeper, it's much more complete, and you should not expect them to match. Okay? Key here is at the bottom, data correction itself in S4HANA conversion is an iterative process. In many cases, if you can't correct the data, one of the best options is archive, is take out problematic data if it at all is possible. If it is not, then significant amounts of time may be required, depending on the level of problems, on trying to get that data in a consistent manner. So one of the things you can do to help that is, this is probably in the preparation phase, it's a good time to delete old clients, since checks are performed across all the clients in the system. There's no filtering that's on there. It's maybe the time to clean up template companies. So checks will be performed on companies. If you identify it as a template company, checks will be a lot more limited, and maybe a good time to do that. So at the very end, after you perform your consistency check, system downtime can start immediately after you document your financial position. So if your consistency checks have passed, then are going to still in system uptime in ECC, you're going to run a whole series of reports to document your system that's in there. And then you're going to run through your conversion process, and you're going to use those 14 reports to compare to what the financial position is in ECC over into what it's converted it into in S4HANA. And we'll go into that a little bit more detail in the next few slides, so just to give you a preview. So that just gives you an overview of the methodology. Before we get into the preparation activities, any additional questions on the line? Press *6 to unmute if you have any. Okay, so that's good. So let's talk about some of the conversion activities themselves. So uptime is, in this context, is from the user perspective, all on the ERP side, the ECC side, right? So with uptime, you're going to perform the check prerequisites for activities such as for new asset accounting. You're going to prepare for new depreciation calculations. You're going to check currency settings and controlling configuration. You're going to rerun some consistency checks. And you're also going to check some customizing settings for product upgrades. It's all within your step 4. we tried to give you a nice cross-section of many of these activities that you'll run prior to running the conversion process itself in uptime. Then at some point, you're going to move into your downtime process, where you're going to lock your users out of the system, right? And you're going to post or delete all financial held documents. You're going to run a series of period-end closings and prepare for cutover. And that's not technically a requirement for conversion, a period-end closing. It's more of a functional finance best practice to allow for ease of reconciliation between the before and after conversion process. And then you would also execute a series of additional pre-migration checks. And then you're going to document your posting data. These are those 14 reports I mentioned in the last slide. You're going to run all these reports before you start the conversion process. where you are financially. You're going to document the financial position in the ERP system before conversion. Of course, the whole reason for the sandbox iteration is to minimize overall downtime, right? And I believe one of you on the phone mentioned downtime is wanting to occur over a weekend. That occurs. Being able to streamline that and make that efficient is because of the sandbox iterative process that occurs. So here are some of the reconciliation reports. These are some of the pre-check reports. You'll run many of these reports. Recognize as you go through the literature, I document that quite explicitly in step 4 activity documents, that certain reports are for classic GL and certain reports are for new GL. You should be aware that our system that you're using in this test environment is already new GL. That's important. I do document that in the activity document. So just to let you know, you'll be using a system, an ECC system, that's already new GL focused and so forth. Many of these reports you run by company code, and in your actual practice, you may have many company codes. So this is not necessarily a trivial process. You may have to run these reports many times on a productive system in order to get the complete picture. Some of these reports are activated by a transaction code. The comparing ledger with general ledgers with the new general ledger report, RGU Comp 4, towards the bottom of this table. You're instructed to run transaction code DCAC because the report is not available through the typical SE38 process in our system today. Okay, so prior to 1809, there is also a check program that was executed. This FINS MIG pre-check cost setting on the left, that is now obsolete as of 1809. 1809 and the current version of 1909 S/4HANA, you would use this SDF RC start check program to run consistency of customizing settings. This is that chart that I was showing you in an earlier slide that identifies by area with an SAC note alongside of it on how that runs. Again, as I mentioned, you can break the workload across the various SMEs more conveniently using this report, and you can do the divide and conquer on your projects in order to develop that run book at a fairly quick pace. So you have within the activity for today's test, you have period end closings and prepare for cutover. Be aware that some of the, if you're not a finance focused individual and you're running through some of these activities, that some of these transaction codes view locking periods differently. Some lock periods and some open periods, right? So you specifically may open periods, a financial period, and then you specifically close specific periods for, say, controlling periods, things of that sort. But the recommended practice, closing periods is not a requirement, but a recommended practice, as I had mentioned before, for the business. Open periods do not technically stop the conversion process itself. You'll also run through the activity check, you'll run pre-migration check. You'll focus on the RC Start check program itself. You will not run the other one because you'll be targeting a 1909 system. You'll want to correct any errors, red lights, as the program returns. With step 4, you'll focus on the finance one. There will be a red light for one of the finance asset accounting error that you'll need to fix. And as I said before a few times, failure to correct these errors will result in a corresponding sum failure as well. You'd also need to, in your ACT, in your activity document today, you're going to document your posting data. There's 14 what I call snapshot reports that you'll execute. Here's a couple of examples. On the left is a high-level financial statement. On the right is a cost center report. You want to make sure before you run these reports, all carry forward balances have been completed. You would want to keep a copy of the snapshot report for potential comparison for the same reports being executed during step 6 of this program after you convert the data into S/4HANA. So before we go into closure and call to action, any questions so far?
Hi, this is Binu from QVC. I have a question on the previous slide. So the second bullet there, execute the 14 snapshot reports. Do you think that step is relevant on a greenfield approach as well? We are doing a greenfield implementation, and could we use this step of executing reports in ECC and then comparing against the reports in S/4HANA?
That, I think, would be relevant because you do need to satisfy auditing, right? In your company, you do need to have consistency of your financial position from one system to another. When you go in greenfield, are you bringing over archived data into your greenfield implementation at all?
What do you mean?
Not, it may
we
not
do
be
archive, but I'm not sure if we are we archiving all of them?
Or are we bringing over any archived data?
Yeah, I don't know if we have made a decision yet because we know markets have our European entities have different requirements around that.
Hey, Sheldon, I have a question on that. So correct me if I'm wrong, Sheldon, but I mean, logically, it sounds correct to use it, but I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. What if the ERP system has inconsistent data that's not cleaned up yet? Your reports won't match, right?
I mean, yeah, that's the case. I mean, it needs to be qualified whether it has relevance, right? If you're comparing, so the whole point of these snapshot reports is to compare your totals or your financial position in 14 different financial areas between the old system and the new system. In your
and it's testing
2BC, you may not have the same data, and so there's not relevance. But my question was, are you bringing the existing data into the new greenfield implementation? It may have relevance. That's why I asked the question.
I think the plan is to bring just the open items, right?
Then it may not really be relevant to what,
because the data is not.
You're not comparing. You're not trying to compare the same data, right?
Okay.
Yeah. However, it is good to know that they exist, right? They're good check reports. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, but I was thinking, I mean, the check reports are there. It's really just to validate our conversion migration program. I mean, that's the intent of it.
And
document your financial position before you convert your ECC system to the data that's converted and migrated over into S/4HANA, they're on the same report. The numbers should match, right? If they don't match, that gives you an indication that there's a problem somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's the purpose of these reports.
Okay.
It's only after you rerun these reports in step 6 do you provide the green light to reopen the system to your users. That's the importance of these reports. It's the last check to make sure all the data that you need got over into S/4HANA, rerun these reports, and then validate, reconcile to the previous reports in ECC. If the numbers match, you're good to go to let your users back in.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Things like say special ledger or something like that, would they still be available on HANA S4? For HANA? I mean, if you're doing like a different type of ledgers and stuff like that, I would think they would go away and that you don't have that support after you complete the conversion.
So there is a slightly different concept. So you don't have special ledgers anymore. You have, what's the name of that? It's on top of the main ledger.
Like simple ledger.
Somebody typed in parallel ledger.
Yeah, parallel ledger. Is it parallel ledgers?
You think it's simple ledger?
Drawing a blank. It's extension ledgers. That's what it is. Extension ledgers. There's a lot of ledgers out there, right? So with special ledgers, what happens when you create a special ledger, you actually make a copy of your leading ledger and put it in your special ledger, and then you add to that special ledger, whatever that the context is. So there's a lot of data redundancy by using the philosophy of using a special ledger concept. A lot of data becomes redundant. There's a lot of redundancy. So within S/4HANA, you have the ability to create what's called extension ledgers on top of your main ledger, which allows you the same kind of functionality, but through specific logic on how you read extension ledger and how you write to extension ledger. You're able to have the same kind of special ledger capability without replicating the data. You reuse the data in the main ledger, but then you have like an exception ledger on top of it, logically on top of it, that can be combined in certain cases and not combined in certain cases. It's a different concept. I can send you some information on that. I'll post it in the steps folder that gives you a little more explanation on it. But it makes it a lot more economical from a memory consumption and a maintenance perspective and a reconciliation perspective. There's no reconciliation necessary because you're not replicating the data between your standard ledger and your special ledger. You're just reusing the same data in the main ledger with an extension ledger logically attached to it. I'll provide some information on that in the Jan group.
Yeah, but I mean,
the other thing is you can have multiple extension ledgers on top. You can have many extension ledgers on top of your main ledger as well. So it's not limited to just one.
Yeah, but you still have that same problem here, though. If you're saying you want to reconcile the extension ledger to the ECC special ledger, you're going to have problems because you're not comparing apples to apples. I mean, if I'm reading that correctly. So I have a special ledger, and I have like 10 reports that use special ledger for that, and maybe they're key financial reports. I need to compare that after the conversion, but now the data is not a special ledger, it's an extension ledger, so it's a totally different type of report, and I might be reconciling report design more than I have data.
Yeah, your report design would have to change. Absolutely right. Because you would have to target the extension ledger instead of the special ledger. You'd have to repoint those reports. Yeah. But the good news is, automatically on the S/4HANA side, the read will take into account the main ledger and the extension ledger in concert, together, automatically, if you so desire. Yeah. So it becomes somewhat seamless from a user perspective. It'll appear to a user to act as the special ledger did. But I'll provide some additional detail in the JAM forum for you on that. Good question. We're not going to deal with special ledgers today, and we're not going to deal with extension ledgers. So, but you do have multiple ledgers in the system that you are going to eventually convert. And so, if you go through your exercises, you'll see that as well. I don't think you'll see a lot more detail until you get to step 6 now. Memory serves me, you're not going to be doing much in terms of preparation. It won't be until step 6 where you start actually running the process of filling the different ledgers directly on the S/4HANA side. Okay. Call to action. So we're in right now in ECC 6 system, the K0X system. That's there. Your activities for this today are going to run consistency checks. You're going to run a series of asset accounting checks. You're going to run period end closing activities. You're going to document posting data, everything we talked about earlier today. And in terms of the detail of the activity, you're going to check and reconcile your data consistency before conversion. You're going to deal with how you're going to have an activity on handling customer-defined fields and interfaces. You're going to post or delete held data. You're going to run a period-end closing and prepare for cutover. Very important, you're going to perform financial balance carry-forward operations. You're going to lock periods. You're going to execute pre-migration checks. And at the very last, you're going to do an accounting snapshot report. Those are those 14 reports to document the pre-conversion state. That's all the activities for the day. So within the JAM group, there is actually 2 documents. There's a pre-activity document and an ACT activity document. The activity document will indicate.
Call from Harold Gutierrez.
You should review that. It's fairly short. We've run some reports for you. You'll be able to look at those. And you'll also go into the ACP document, which will be rather lengthy. It should take you at least 2 hours, maybe if you're very, very, very fast and you've done it before, or likely a little over 3 hours if you're not familiar with it, going step by step. Maybe a little longer, you have to stop the break. Okay? In the JAM forum, please enter any questions you have on the activity for step 4. And Monica and I are subscribed to that forum, and we'll attempt to answer your questions in a timely manner. Okay, so that's it for the presentation.